All right, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the chill stream. Hello. I'll say hello to all of you that are in here. Welcome. Please hit the like on your way in. I would appreciate it. How is everybody doing? Whoop whoop. It's so good to see everyone. Lady B. G, Cool Gamer, Miss Fit, Angel, Debbie, Suzanne, welcome. Yes, please do all that stuff. Oh yes, hold on before I forget. So tonight's chill stream, it's scary interesting. Sorry, words are hard. He just dropped his newest video, so that's what we're gonna be going over to watch. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I don't know why. Like it looks like I'm on a delay. Am I? Is anyone out there? Okay, looks like you guys can hear me. Thank you. All right, hold on. All right, goody, goody, goody. All right, let me come back up here. Hold, please. Let me share my screen. All right, so I went ahead and I pinned scary, interesting info to the top of the chat. That way, if any of you would like to sub up to him, go ahead and do so. We'll be looking at his content tonight. Hope everyone has a chill stream. Aw, thank you, Misfit. You're a lovey. Thank you, thank you. You're lovey. StreamYard always kicks me when I try to share screen, doesn't it? All right, so I'm going to press play real quick. Just let me know if you guys can see and hear it okay, all right? Wait, I don't want myself completely gone. There we go. Okay.
7 hikers set out into a southern Siberian mountain range to hike and explore the beautiful wilderness.
Okay, was the volume okay, guys? Give me a thumbs up if volume and the audio and visual, if all that's okay. Okay, we got thumbs up. Welcome, Mr. Malloy. Cadet. Okay, so everyone can see in here. So we're about to begin. So something terrifying happened to them in the Siberian mountains. I have no idea what this one's about. I think it's probably self-explanatory by the title. So, all right, everyone ready to go? Give me a thumbs up again, and we'll start. Whoop, whoop. All right. Tippy. All right. Oops. I skipped. Caught myself here. Redo. Oh, why is it doing that?
Was a master of survival craft, and at 41 years old, 93, 7 hikers set out into a southern Siberian mountain range to hike and explore the beautiful wilderness. Unfortunately,
Expert, don't tell us what happened. How could you watch this without me? You're supposed to wait for me to watch this. That's the rules, expert. How could you? I'm just kidding. Was it good? Actually, don't tell me if it's good. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. Don't tell me.
somewhere deep in those mountains, something so horrifying and confusing would happen to them that it's still a mystery to this day. This is their story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. Lyudmila Korovina was known as a master of survival craft, and at 41 years old, she'd spent decades teaching mountaineering to young students in Kazakhstan. She was known to push people to their limits, and sometimes beyond, to mold them into the best hikers they could be. But despite her reputation for being tough, her past students said she was as good a mentor as you can get, and many of them claimed to owe their lives to the skills she taught them. In 1993, an event known as the Turyata Tourism Festival was taking place, and people representing tourism and mountain sports from all over Russia and the surrounding countries gathered to camp, participate in competitions, and explore the Kamar-Daban Mountains. During this festival, Lyudmila wanted to take a group of her favorite students to do something special and a little more challenging than usual. The Kamar-Daban Mountains are a small chain that form part of Russia's South Siberian Mountains, and they sit near the border with Mongolia near the city of Irkutsk. They stretch 350 kilometers from east to west and are thought to be the oldest mountain range in the world. They aren't the highest by any measure and peak at just under 2,400 meters or 8,000 feet, but they're still challenging and beautiful, and with a railroad that provides easy access, they're a popular destination for both tourists and mountaineers. In the summer, they can get quite humid, and temperatures hang around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 18 Celsius. It also often rains heavily as thunderstorms roll in from the Mongolian plateau. But again, despite the dampness, they're considered a safe destination to go hiking and an ideal spot for young hikers to explore the wilderness. The route the group had planned, though, wasn't one for the average tourist. Generally, trekking has 3 or 4 levels of difficulty, depending on where you are. Russia used a 4-grade system at the time, starting with easy for beginners, moving up to moderate, where you walk up small hills for up to 4 hours or so per day, onto strenuous, where you spend much of the day climbing higher peaks, and then very strenuous or challenging, which sometimes uses no trail at all, and hikers will often travel along high ridges and over mountains from dawn to dusk. And how a route is graded comes down not only to how high you go and how long you'll be walking, but also how many skills you'll need, like knowing how to rock climb or navigate in the wilderness. They're also graded on how physically and mentally fit you have to be to complete the route, and the route Lyudmila and the group had chosen was a grade 4, which is the highest difficulty. Knowing this would be the most difficult trek they'd ever done, they spent months leading up to preparing and training, and over the course of that time, Lyudmila's tough love shaped them into both competent mountaineers and close friends. Finally, on August 2nd, the full group met up to catch the train to Irkutsk. In addition to Lyudmila, there was Valentina, who generally went by the name Valia. Valia was 17 and had been walking the hills all her life and was known for being calm and collected in tough situations. Joining them was also 23-year-old Sasha. He and Lyudmila were close, and she had known him since he was just a kid and often described him as being like a son to her. Sasha was also exceptionally fit and very experienced at this sort of challenging hike. He would act as almost a second coach next to Lyudmila. There was also 19-year-old Dennis, who was sort of an accidental member of the group. He only got his place on the trip when someone else dropped out because their parents wouldn't let them go. He was so excited to be part of the group that all he left was a short note for his parents that he was going to the mountains and he would be back soon before leaving the house. Then there was also 24-year-old Tatiana, who loved walking the mountains but had never attempted anything beyond a moderate grade 2. This was a chance for her to prove what she was made of, and after all the training they'd done, she felt like she was ready to handle anything. Next was Timur, who was the youngest in the group at just 15. He was essentially born to trek, though, and grew up in the mountains and hiking with his parents basically as soon as he was old enough to walk. And then finally, there was 16-year-old Victoria. She wasn't a
These guys are young, huh? Like 15 and 16. Hold on real quick. I wanted to say, Elizabeth said I have a child who does extreme hikes, mountain climbs. I could barely climb out of the bed some days. Um, how like is he an adult, a teenager? That's so interesting. Does he travel like a lot of places doing it? Very cool. Okay, onward.
A natural mountaineer, but desperately wanted to be a part of the trip. At first, the others weren't happy about this because she'd had a temper tantrum on a winter hike earlier that year after getting tired. She wouldn't have even been there at all if her mother hadn't called Ludmila and begged her to take her along. But later, during training, she worked hard and regained the trust and friendship of the rest of the group. After meeting up, they started their journey by train from their home in Kazakhstan to Irkutsk. From there, they went to Marino, which is a town at the foot of the range and the perfect spot to set off from. On the way, they were joined by a couple of guys from Moscow, heading to the area to relax and fish by the Sniezhny River. Then, after arriving in Marino, the plan was to walk until August 5th and eventually meet up with another group led by Ludmila's daughter, Natalia. Both groups checked the weather forecasts, and things were looking good with above average temperatures and just a little rain forecasted over the next 4 days. The first 2 days went well, and the group took a slightly more unusual route than most, but in doing so, cut off a bunch of time that helped them summit several of the highest peaks ahead of schedule. They walked around 70 kilometers and crossed the Langutai Gorge, then across high plateaus over several rivers, and then up the highest in the Kamar-Daban range, known as Kanulu. Then on the third day, a cyclone coming up from Mongolia took the region by surprise and caused a day of rain that left the center of Irkutsk flooding up to people's knees. That same rain fell hard in the mountains, and at higher elevations, this turned to heavy snow, and the group was walking along a high ridge when the skies opened up and the snow and rain came pouring down. Initially, they decided to press on as far as they could, worried they might miss their rendezvous with the other party. But then as they trudged down the mountain, soaking wet in the pouring rain and wind, realized it was too exhausting to continue. So at about 4 p.m., they decided that instead of heading through the forest to the planned camping spot, they'd set up camp in the open and get some rest. This really wasn't a great spot to camp because it was an exposed and windy patch between two mountains with just some rocks and grass for shelter. The ideal location under the tree line was another 4 kilometers away, but that was just too far to drag themselves and their drenched bags in the ice-cold rain. They obviously couldn't build a fire either, but that didn't dampen the mood. While the rain continued to come down, they did their best to enjoy the night, huddling in the 2 driest tents while talking about what they'd achieved on the hike so far. For some reason, maybe because they didn't want to get them wet on the inside, they never got into their sleeping bags. They didn't even take them out of the plastic wrap and instead just fell asleep exhausted on the floor of their tents on plastic ground sheets. Unfortunately, that night wasn't much better and sleep would be short-lived. At 4 a.m., the ropes to the tent snapped and they had to go outside to fix them. Not long after they'd done that, the wind tore the stake holding the tents down. Then, finally, after a wet and cold night, they woke up to snow covering most of the area. As they got up and cooked breakfast, they found that the snow had covered basically all the landmarks from the day before. After breakfast, at around 11:30, they set off toward the trees, hoping that tree cover would provide some shelter and help them to get their bearings. With any luck, they'd meet the other group ahead of time as they planned the night before. Unfortunately, this is where things took an almost unbelievable turn. According to Valia, just 10 meters into their trek down the hill, Sasha just fell over. They helped him to his feet, but he fell again, and this time he let out a piercing scream. Ludmila told the rest of the group to keep moving while she returned to help, but in the meantime, inexplicably, Sasha was foaming at the mouth while blood started pouring from his eyes and ears. After falling to the ground a second time, he started violently convulsing, and then by the time Ludmila could reach him, he'd already stopped moving. Upon seeing Sasha collapse, she cried out for the others to get help as she began trying to revive him, but basically as soon as they started moving again, Ludmila also screamed out for help. Valia quickly covered the others and then told them to wait where they were and then ran back to Ludmila and Sasha. In some accounts, Valia claims Ludmila died the same way as Sasha, but in others, she claims that she'd had a heart attack. Either way, to Valia and the others' shock, Ludmila passed out and collapsed on top of Sasha. Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur then climbed out from underneath their covering and rushed back to them, but almost immediately, Tatiana started grasping for air too and grabbing at her throat as if she was trying to force her airway open. Then, to everyone's horror, she ran to a nearby boulder and began hitting her head against it over and over until she finally went limp and slumped to the ground.
She started banging her head over and over again on a rock or a boulder? What the? It's like Night of the Living Dead. What the heck's going on with them?
Terrified and having just witnessed the horrific scene, Valia froze and dropped to the ground as well. Dennis, also horrified at what he was witnessing, crouched down and hid behind an outcropping of rocks while trying to get inside his sleeping bags, hoping it could protect him from whatever was happening to the others. Finally, Valia snapped out of it and composed herself and crawled over to Ludmila and found that she wasn't breathing. Then she went back to Timur, who was by then completely hysterical, and lifted him onto his feet and told him to head for the trees. Next, she took Victoria by the arm and began pushing her out in front of her toward the forest, but Victoria went into a frenzy and started violently pulling away from Valia. Eventually, she even bit Valia's hand, which caused her to let go and then ran off toward the forest after Timur. But unfortunately,
she bit her. You know what my mom used to tell me growing up? This is just a side note. And I say it now all the time when I hear about someone biting. I say, biting causes diseases. She bit her? What's going on? This is getting crazier and crazier.
they also didn't manage to get far before they both began to cough up blood and started clawing at their throats, just like Tatiana. Valia then watched as they started tearing off and started violently pulling away from Valia. Eventually, she even bit Valia's hand, which caused her to let go and then ran off toward the forest after Timur. But unfortunately, they also didn't manage to get far before they both began to cough up blood and started clawing at their throats, just like Tatiana. Valia then watched as they started tearing off their clothes as if they were boiling up inside before they both collapsed to the ground. Dennis, who up until then hadn't been overcome by whatever was happening to the others, shouted to Valia to dump all the essentials from her backpack. He then took off for the woods as she began emptying her bag, but almost as soon as he broke cover from the boulder, he began to choke like the others, bleeding from his face and his body seizing as he fell to the ground. Valia then looked around and saw that every single one of her friends was on the ground and not moving, and her normal calm turned into a massive adrenaline surge, so she got up and sprinted, and she kept running until she was deep inside the woods. Finally, she couldn't run anymore, and she was far enough inside the forest and away from the wind. In the calm that follows panic, Valia tried to compose herself again, but supposedly by then, the storm had become so strong that trees were falling like matches around her. She eventually spotted a crack in a cliffside and just wedged herself inside it to hide until the storm died down. While waiting, she thought about her family and she worried about what might happen to her mother if she didn't return home. At the same time, she thought about everything she'd just seen and tried to make sense of it. It was like a literal nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. A little while later, after the storm had calmed down a bit and she had calmed down a little bit, she found what seemed like a safe spot and set up camp. She realized that thanks to Dennis, she still had her pack and some essentials, which thankfully included a tent, a plastic ground sheet, and some clothing. Finally, after setting everything up, she climbed inside her sleeping bag, threw her tent over her for extra warmth, and then completely wiped out, fell into a deep sleep. The following day, she woke up cold and hungry and realized that a tent and a change of clothes weren't enough to keep her alive for long. She had no choice but to go back the way she came to see if she could find supplies in the bodies of the rest of the group, which also meant potentially encountering whatever it was that had caused everything from the day before. When she reached them, she cautiously approached and found that they were still where they had fallen. Then, after finding a map and some food from their packs, she had an even worse realization. She had no idea where she was. She had a map now, but the snow cover still made it impossible to spot landmarks. Instead, the best she could do was follow the tree line until she found something that she recognized on the map, so off she went down toward the forest again. Several hours later, after walking across the mountain essentially all day, she spotted an abandoned electricity relay tower in the distance. With this new sign of civilization, she set off once again and eventually reached it by nightfall. It seemed like as good a spot as any to set up camp, and as she did, she wondered if anyone had alerted search and rescue after they missed their rendezvous. It seemed inevitable that soon enough, search and rescue would be scouring the area looking for them. Unfortunately, no help was coming. When Ludmila's group didn't show up at the meeting point, Natalia and the other team weren't worried. She knew they were strong hikers, that her mother was a master, and there'd be nothing to worry about. She assumed the rain had just slowed them down and she'd see them all when they got home. In the morning and in the light of day, Valia noticed that the tower she'd slept under was just one of a chain heading down the mountain. She guessed that if she followed them down the hill, they'd lead to somewhere she could find help. The route was difficult and the forest overgrowth slowed her progress, but she eventually reached the end and found a small abandoned village that was once supplied by the electricity cables she followed. It was disappointing that no one was there, but then just beyond the houses was a major river. Since the tourism festival was taking place in the area, and part of that was kayaking, canoeing, and fishing, she thought she could use the river to find a route, or at least signal for help. By then, it was late again,
So was this an abandoned village? I didn't catch that part. Okay, she plays it.
Valia spent another night at the waterside before heading down to the bank to see if anyone would pass by.
So
The following day was a much warmer day, and the heat began to
Poor
take its
lady.
toll on her already exhausted body. After walking for another several kilometers, she remembered that in training she'd been shown how to use a sleeping bag to let rescue parties know where you are. So she draped hers over a bush by the river and then rested and waited, hoping to be spotted. Not far from where she was, a kayaker named Alexander was taking a small group of fellow Ukrainians down the Snezhnia River. It had been a relaxing day, and the thin curtain of snow that lined the banks made the area even more picturesque than usual. The tourism festival made it quite a busy river, with people paddling and fishing down the shore. On his way up, they passed a couple of fishermen from Moscow and waved hello. They waved back, as was the custom, as the group dipped their paddles into the clear waters and
Hello,
continued
you
on their
bugger.
way. As they floated along, they spotted a sleeping bag by the riverside as they reached a bend. Stood next to it was the motionless, expressionless Valia. Assuming she was just another person out fishing on the bank, they shouted a greeting at her but didn't get a response. Valia didn't even move a muscle. Right away, something wasn't quite right about the girl, making them uneasy as they continued down the river.
Oh,
And although
great.
they
I
didn't
hope she
want to,
didn't
soon
get
enough, they
alive,
knew they
too.
had to turn back. It's here that the story begins to break up a bit. Some reports say that Valia was covered in blood and became inconsolable when kayakers approached, but according to the kayakers, there was no blood. One of the kayakers also claims that she looked like she'd recently washed her hair and face in the river. When they got to her and asked what happened, she didn't say a word because she was too shocked and traumatized to speak. Instead, she buried her head into Alexander's chest and sobbed. The kayakers then wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and dug out some antibiotics and other medicine to give her in case she had an infection. After she was bundled up, they all headed back down the river together, and before long, they bumped the same fishermen they had met earlier, and Valia instantly recognized them. They were the fishermen from Moscow she'd met on the train. Upon seeing her, they smiled and waved and asked how the others were getting along. This is probably when Valia broke down and talked, although it's not entirely clear. In a garbled frenzy, she told them what had happened. She told them about the screams and the blood. She told them about the cold and the panic. She told them how the two youngest had run away only to fall to the ground and how Tatiana smashed her head against the rock. And obviously, after hearing this, her new friends were horrified and confused. None of what she said made sense. They decided to look after her from then on and helped her back out of the wilderness to let police know something had happened to the rest of her party. They even arranged for her train ticket back home once it was all over. It took a few days before Valia could tell the story in a way that anyone could understand. But once it was clear that something had happened to the others, the police commissioned a helicopter to go and search for them. The weather and other factors made it impossible for them to get off the ground until August 21st, nearly 2 weeks after the incident. And as it happened, they weren't the only people missing in the region. 2 other hikers had been reported missing on August 17th. After 5 days of searching, they spotted the pair who, like Valia, had found a good spot to wait for rescue and covered a bush with their sleeping mats so they could be spotted. Then, right after the helicopter took off with the pair on board, they spotted the missing party, and it wasn't a pretty sight. The bodies of the group were found on a small ledge, and some were huddled together, while others were some distance away. During those few weeks, the bodies had begun to swell up, while insects, animals, and normal decomposition had started to destroy what was left. Many of the battle-hardened
Really?
recovery team threw up at the sight of them. To make the scene even more horrific, everyone in the group seemed to have removed most of their clothing, with most of them wearing only thin tights. 3 of them
That's
were barefoot,
hypothermia,
apart from the
though.
2
I think
youngsters
that
who
part
tore
of
at their
it.
clothes, which Valia hadn't mentioned in her story. The bodies were eventually wrapped in plastic and flown to a nearby city for autopsy, and weirdly, the autopsy found that they had all died from hypothermia except for Lyudmila, who had died of a heart attack. They also had bruising in their lungs, suggesting some issues with their breathing, and even more strangely, they were all on the brink of starving and were found to have critically low protein levels. So what caused these deaths is still a mystery. There are a few ideas, some more likely than others, but they all have problems. One idea is that they accidentally witnessed a military experiment and were murdered to keep them quiet, and then their deaths were covered up by the authorities, which is why Valia's story doesn't match what was found in the autopsy. After all, they had strayed from the usual route, and who knows what was going on in the early years of post-Soviet Russia. This doesn't explain how Valia survived, however. On top of that, as far as we know, no one tried to shut her up after she told her story. After the incident, Valia studied at college and left Kazakhstan for a new life, and now with a family, she's only once spoken about the incident and swears she never will again. She claims that she just doesn't want to relive the nightmare. At the same time, she's never retracted her original story. If she had been coerced into keeping quiet, why would she tell everyone a story that only makes things more mysterious? Why not just say they froze to death because they weren't ready for such a big storm and she was the lone survivor? And that's another problem with the secret government operation idea. It's a popular area where a lot of people go hiking, and it was even more popular at the time because of the tourism festival. It seems unlikely that a secret government project would use that spot when the mountains just a few hundred miles away are much more remote. So if it wasn't a government murder and cover-up, could the government have killed them accidentally? Russia has been known to use nerve agents in the past, and it even has a class of poisonous gases that fit the symptoms that Valia described. They were developed around 1993, and some reports claim they were tested in the Kamar-Daban region. This type of nerve agent was even famously used to assassinate a Russian double agent and his daughter in Salisbury, England in 2018. And if it was this nerve agent, some people think the rain might have had something to do with it. These poisons can dissolve in the water and hang
Like
around
how
for
he
long
says
periods
how
of time.
the government,
And if they were testing the poison in the
government may have
mountains in the weeks or
accidentally
months
done
before
it.
the trip,
They're like,
the excess
"Oops, my
toxin
bad."
could have been washed down in the heavy rain. At some point that morning, Sasha might have accidentally stepped into a pool of that poison. Then, after stepping in it, when Ludmila rushed over to help him, she was poisoned as well, followed by
yep.
Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur, and finally Dennis, who by crouching on the ground also became contaminated by poisoned groundwater. This theory could also explain why the police waited so long to begin their search. They might have needed to make sure the area was clear. However, again, it doesn't explain how Valia survived. She got to the first two victims before anyone else and touched the arm of someone who could have been contaminated. That should have been enough to kill her. On top of all of that, it would have just been the worst luck for those chemicals to have seeped into the ground just at the right time and in the right amount to contaminate a single hiker who then killed everyone else, all while never infecting anyone else anytime that year. So another theory is that if they were poisoned, it didn't necessarily have to be a military nerve agent that made them sick. Maybe it was just their drinking water that was poisoned. High in the Kamar-Daban Mountains is Lake Baikal. As well as being a tourist attraction for its beautiful landscapes and popular trails, it's also where tens of thousands of tons of toxic waste have been dumped. A pulp and paper mill has been dumping chlorine and other nasty chemicals into lakes since 1966, and excrement and fuel have also been pumped in at least that long. One idea is that the group had been topping up their water in the rivers downstream of Lake Baikal that morning, and they were hit by something like chlorine poisoning. But then again, how did Valia survive when no one else did? And why did it only happen to this one group? You'd expect more reports of people becoming sick after topping up their water bottles in local streams, especially given how big the lake is and how close it is to some big towns and villages. But there are just no other reports, so if it wasn't nerve gas or something they drank, maybe they hadn't been poisoned at all. Maybe Valia was simply mistaken. Another theory is that the account that Valia told was simply her mind trying to cope with trauma. Human brains don't remember things perfectly. That's because the job of memory isn't to keep a perfect record of what we've done. Memory keeps hold of any information that our brains think might be useful in the future, bits and pieces that might one day help keep us alive. Some psychologists believe that's why people who nearly drown say,
I don't believe that one. I don't believe it. I don't think that your memory is going to make up something totally 120% different than what actually happened. Maybe a few things, yeah, but not what she witnessed. I don't think so. That's just my opinion.
say they see their whole life flash before them. It's your brain's way of trying to find something from your life that can help you get out of the situation. At the same time, our brains also twist and distort our memories to help us make better sense of things, especially when things are traumatic. The group might have died of hypothermia as they camped out, exposed, wet, hungry, and without a fire to warm them. Valia might have survived because she was fitter than the others, had warmer clothes, was sleeping in a slightly warmer spot, or was just lucky. Then when she woke up, she would have found her friends dead or dying, some of them without their clothes due to paradoxical undressing, and then she could have panicked and run. When asked, all Valia will say was that the cold rain was the cause of what happened and that Ludmila isn't to blame. But maybe she was, and Valia couldn't cope with that. As a survival mechanism, maybe her brain ignored her instructor's bad choices and it gave her a false memory of what happened. It wasn't just a poorly planned hike gone wrong, but some terrible, mysterious sickness that passed from one to the other. The chief specialist of the area's rescue service thinks that this is the most likely explanation. He puts it down to mass psychosis caused by hypothermia and exhaustion. However, even he pointed out that others survived heavy snow at the same time the group was out, so why not them? He thinks that this might simply have been because they weren't prepared for the storm, but at the same time, they'd spent months getting ready with a known master mountaineer with a reputation for excellence. So could that be true? They were supposed to be prepared for anything, and it doesn't explain how Valia's training was good enough to keep her alive, but not the others. So, with Valia refusing to open up about what happened and so many problems with each of the proposed theories, the Kamar-Daban disaster might always remain a mystery. In any case, I'm curious to hear what all of you think happened, so let me know down in the comments which explanation you think is most likely. If you enjoyed this video, this is part of a series, so you might want to check out the other videos in the series. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to send it to the email found in the description. We also have a scary...
Okay, what do you guys think? What do you guys think is what happened to him? Or yeah, do you think it was likely they had like two or three different things going on with the government? Like either maybe there was an experiment they were running, they did it on accident, something about the water. Um, I think that was the ones that all the theories they had about the government. Putin did it? You think so, Maddie? Maybe he did. How long ago was this? We got to see where he was at. We need to dig. We need to dig and see where he was during this during this hike they had, huh? There's a similar one to this. I think it's called like it's like Devalto Pass or something like that. Um, so Lady V says she thinks it's cover up, military cover up type thing. Do you think maybe they accidentally dosed him, or do you think they got into some water, or what do you think it was? Aliens. Don't say that, Elizabeth. I have a fear of aliens. I don't want them. Well, as long as they stay over there on that side of the continent, not my side. So hold on. Is this the same as that Devalto Pass case that I've heard about? Because this doesn't ring similar, but I don't know if it's the same one. It sounds really similar, except for those people. There was like people with their tongues removed, all types of weird stuff when they were hiking. But it was similar in like the sense that like they all started wigging out at once, and like one went off and had a heart attack. Two like fell off of the mountain. I mean, picture that. Picture you're doing all this hiking, right? You're with a group of friends. It might have been pretty cold overnight. Then you guys are waking up in the morning the next day, and then everyone just starts like dropping dead and doing crazy shit right before they do so. I mean, doing crazy stuff right before they do so. How crazy would that be to like witness that? It's got to be insane. Why I don't think that was an accident. Interesting. Okay, gotcha. I know not aliens. That's what Elizabeth said. Aliens. That's why I said that. You dork. I don't think it's aliens. Maybe not. Hold on, let me read this. I just got here. I was on another channel. Troller was so mean and horrible and pleasing crowd. I got him. Is he mean to you? Tell him to go. Tell him to go. Kick rocks. Oh, hold on. I'm gonna check one more thing to see if I missed this or not. If we watched this one, I think we did, but I'll double check. Hold please. Hold please. So we got one more to watch. I'm gonna put bedtime stories. I'm gonna drop his link in here. Let me know if you guys can hear it and see it okay, like if I'm sharing it. And then this will be the last one.
On a summer morning in 1925, a Polish family set out on a planned hike through one of the country's picturesque mountainous regions.
Okay, let me know if you guys can hear and see, okay? Are you going to bed night, Malloy? Why are people in the village checking up on you? What are you talking about? I don't know. What are you talking about? Send me a message. You're so cute, Judy. I love you, Judy. You're such a sweetie. She's like, but they like you. You're so sweet. Okay, could you guys give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear and see? Okay. Okay, yeah, I got one. Thank you. Okay. So this is bedtime stories. This is a mountain one. It goes with a theme. I haven't seen this one, so we're going to see if it's good. And I did drop their channel. I'll do it again in a little bit.
On a summer morning in 1925, a Polish family set out on a planned hike through one of the country's picturesque mountainous regions. Beset by uncharacteristically poor weather conditions, what happened to them next remains unexplained to this day. Join us this week as we delve into the
You brat, Maddie.
mystery of the Tatra Mountains. But first, a shout out to this episode's sponsor, Surfshark. We have talked a lot about Surfshark's VPN service on this channel, particularly the really cool stuff like unlimited device use, top-notch security features, and the fact that it's privacy to a whole new level.
No
Get
more
4
shock,
months extra
shock.
free, and you can
No shock for you. He's such a brat. He's such a brat.
The lone hiker came to a halt in the center of the clearing, before unshouldering his pack and rummaging deep inside to recover his spare water canteen. The ground beneath his feet remained damp from the bad weather which had plagued the last few days. The faint trace of a chill still lingered in the air. But these were far removed from the worst conditions that Mariusz Zaruski had ever experienced, and in truth, he had never felt more alive than when he was traversing this mountainous region. A prominent public figure, Zaruski had always been something of a restless soul, and had spent most of his adult life exploring the various summits and valleys of the Tatra mountain range.
Good old Zaruski.
These were difficult times for the Polish people. Their nation was still coming to terms with the aftermath of the Great War, and in doing so, struggling to define their own political identity. As a result, the former cavalry officer took every opportunity to escape the turbulent demands of his daily life, devoting any of his free time to fellow travelers who may require assistance. As beautiful as this landscape was, it was also a place of great danger, with various hunters and hikers having lost their lives over the years due to exposure and other such hazards. And it had been during the previous evening, whilst having dinner at a local tavern, that he'd overheard the story of a family which had yet to return from the mountains after setting out on a walk a few days prior. Having spent the rest of that evening consulting the various maps and sketches of the region he had compiled over the years, Zaruski resolved to make his way up to an area named Bald Clearing, located at the base of the Sycamore Valley. From his own experience, he had decided that this was the most likely route the family would have taken, given their last reported sighting. Zurewski was standing in quiet contemplation when there was a movement at the far end of the clearing. A woman slowly emerged from the trees, bedraggled and displaying signs of possible hypothermia. Hurrying towards the floundering figure, Zurewski did not arrive in time to prevent her from falling heavily to the ground. He was again reaching for his canteen when she gripped his arm tightly, preventing him from doing so. Wild-eyed and staring up at him in a mixture of confusion and terror, she mumbled something he could not quite understand. It was only when he leant in closer that he managed to make out her words. "Dead," she said. "They are dead." The Tatra Mountains stretch across an area in excess of 300 square miles, rising up from sea level to form a natural border between Poland and the neighbouring country of Slovakia. With an undulating landscape which is somewhat similar in nature to its alpine cousins, the Tatra region forms the highest part of the wider Carpathian mountain range, which spreads out in an arc around Eastern Europe. The peaks of the Tatra Mountains are generally considered more accessible to visitors, and over the years they have become popular with both seasoned hikers and far less experienced winter tourists. And it was into the latter half of these two groups that a trio of visitors arrived in the region for a short trip during August of 1925. Having travelled from the nearby city of Krakow, the party consisted of Kazimierz Kasnika, as well as his wife Valeria and their 12-year-old son. Kasnika was a criminal prosecutor of some national repute, and he had planned to walk with his family up through a region known as the Sycamore Valley and on through the resort town of Zakopane.
Angel, have a good night.
The route he had selected covered almost 16 kilometers. It was generally considered to be easily traversable, save for an arduous stretch known as the Ice Pass, which rose up at points to a height of roughly 2,500 meters, or just over 8,000 feet. Having eaten their breakfast at a hillside shelter in the Valley of the Five Ponds, the family commenced their hike early on the morning of August 3rd, only for the weather to almost immediately close in upon them. At lunchtime, with the wind speed increasing and temperatures dropping, they encountered a group of 4 more experienced climbers at one of the mountain shelters and asked if they could accompany them. Although initially agreeable to this, 3 of the 4 climbers soon tired of having their progress significantly impaired by the newcomers. This was largely as a result of Kasnika, whose spectacles kept steaming up, causing him to have to stop and clean them before then moving off again. A few hours further up the trail, the quartet came to a halt, and there followed some debate about whether they should move off on their own and leave the family behind. After a brief discussion, Zbigniew Wasserberger was the only member of the group who felt obligated to remain with the Kasnikas, and simply watched on as his fellow hikers headed off up the mountain at their own pace. As the 3 climbers later paused further on up the trail, they turned to see the family and Wasserberger falling further and further behind them, until they were swallowed up by a patch of rolling fog. It would be a further 2 days before they were seen again, and after they were finally located, the question over what had happened to them after being left behind would puzzle commentators for decades and remain unsolved to this very day. Having successfully intercepted Valeria Kasnika on the afternoon of the 5th of August, Mariusz Zurewski carried her back down the trail in order to seek medical assistance, before heading back up the mountain with a search party. A little further up the Sycamore Valley from where he had encountered Valeria, Zurewski and his fellow rescuers went on to discover the rest of her party, lying dead in a patch of open ground known as the Frog Pond. Kazimierz Kasnika was lying backwards across a rock near some water, eyes staring sightlessly up into the clear skies above him. Not far away from where he lay, slumped against a boulder, was his lifeless son. Neither body exhibited any indication of how they had perished, which was in some contrast to the remains of Wasserberger. His body was sprawled out, well away from the other two, having apparently sustained a
The
head
art
injury
they
and a
did on this
broken
is
arm as a
little
result of the
humorous,
harsh
I just
fall.
have to say, like how he's just spread out on the rock.
At a loss to
trying not
explain what had
fall at it.
occurred, the army officer documented the scene before ordering the men accompanying him to retrieve the bodies and begin the slow descent back towards civilization. It had been hoped that as soon as Valeria was able to recount her tale, the reason for the three men's deaths would become more apparent. And yet, once she went on to regain consciousness, the account offered by the prosecutor's wife only seemed to deepen the mystery further. She explained how, as their group had pushed on up the ice pass, their progress had slowed as both the weather
This is still 1925, right? Yeah, it is. Okay. Sorry.
and their strength significantly deteriorated.
You guys, we just time traveled. We're back
Eventually,
in 1925.
Genius had finally ceded to Wasserberger's pleas for them all to turn back, and amidst a howling gale, the four of them had begun to clamber back down the mountain. The first sign of the coming danger was when her son began to weaken and complained to his mother that he could not walk any further. Keen for them to push on to a place of safety, Wasserberger had passed the boy's pack to Valeria and then carried the youngster down the trail in his arms. But at this point, as they neared the frog pond, Genius had dropped to his knees and stated that he was feeling extremely weak. Valeria had begun to assist him when she had suddenly heard a worried cry from behind her and turned to see Wasserberger collapse, apparently afflicted in a manner similar to that of her ailing husband. Amidst a state of growing confusion, she had turned and hurried back towards the climber, assisting both him and her son in getting to the shelter of a nearby boulder. Having sat them down alongside one another, Wasserberger had told her that he also felt extremely weak. Valeria administered some cognac, which she had brought along with her in a hip flask, and then gave her son some chocolate before running back to help Genius. Once she had reached her
I
husband,
love that they gave him
she
a
had
drink
given
out of
him
the
a
flask.
sip of the
Like, here, this will
brandy,
make you feel better. I
watching
love
on
it.
in helpless panic as he subsequently passed away in her arms. There was a sudden thump from behind her, and Valeria turned to see Wasserberger lying at an odd angle on the ground, having apparently tripped and fallen whilst walking towards her. He too was now dead, and when she returned to care for her son, she found that he too had passed away. In despair, she had sunk to her knees, apparently unaffected by whatever it was that had killed the rest of her group. For the next 2 days, hemmed in by bad weather and unsure of what to do next, she'd huddled up with her blanket and the family's gas burner, before finally descending in search of help when the rain ceased. Autopsies carried out on the remains of the 3 victims proved somewhat inconclusive as to the cause of their deaths, and with no evidence to support that any crime had taken place, the tragic event was not investigated any further. In the years that have followed, very few theories have been put forward to explain what might have taken place, and even those which have been suggested have proven woefully unconvincing. When looking at this incident, there are 2 clear commonalities amongst the deceased. The first is that they were all male. The second is that they all took a sip of the cognac from Valeria's hip flask. If we are to believe her account, she
Don't
is the
you
only
dare
member of the
blame the
group who
booze.
did not
Don't
drink
you
any of the
dare.
brandy, and
Don't
for
you
obvious
dare.
reasons, this has caused a great deal of suspicion to fall upon her in the ensuing decades. Commentators theorize that Valeria wished to do away with her husband and son, either in the hopes of inheriting her spouse's wealth or running to the arms of another man without enduring the stigma of divorce. They speculate that Valeria spiked the brandy with the intention of offering it to her family members at the most appropriate moment. The presence of Wasserberger foiled this somewhat, and there is a possibility that he refused the brandy entirely, at which point she bashed his head in with a rock so as not to leave any witnesses.
Holy
It's a
cow.
plausible explanation, but one which falls apart under closer scrutiny. First and foremost, there is a clear lack of motive. If she really wished to inherit her husband's fortune or elope with a hidden lover, why kill her own son? By all accounts, Valeria was a loving wife and doting mother, entirely happy in her marriage. After the deaths of her husband and child, she fell into a deep depression and didn't remarry for many years. There is no denying that Kazimius was well off, but his alleged fortune, often cited by many who believe this theory, was non-existent. There was no vast wealth for Valeria to inherit, and she had neither the constitution nor motivation to murder her family in cold blood. So instead, could the prosecutor have been targeted by criminal or even political elements within his community, who poisoned the drink without his or Valeria's knowledge?
That could be. I could see that.
It is not hard to imagine the reasons behind killing someone of Kazimius's stature if he had laid legal proceedings against the wrong people. But this seems an awfully clumsy way to assassinate someone. Why go to the trouble and invite the risk of secretly poisoning a hip flask which belongs to the wife of your target? Surely it would have been easier to stage a robbery gone wrong in some remote mountain pass. In any case, the real sledgehammer blow to this theory comes from the post-mortems. Whilst the contents of Valeria's hip flask were never tested, autopsies clearly showed that all 3 deaths were attributed to pulmonary edema, followed by cardiac arrest, with no toxic substances found in the bloods. Not to mention that all 3 of the deceased were exhibiting signs of a serious decline before they even consumed the brandy, although we concede that we only have Valeria's word to go on in this instance.
Interesting.
Another thing which was revealed by the post-mortem was that Kazimius had an existing heart defect, which had not been public knowledge, and that his son's heart also bore traces of the same disease. It may be that some biological factor which arose during the trip somehow triggered identical heart attacks in the father and son. And yet, the death of Wasserberger would seem to contradict this. He was fit and well, with no trace of an underlying health issue, yet died with the same symptoms. Given the results of the autopsies, it would be fair to assume that the trio died as a result of acute mountain sickness, or AMS. Whilst this is more prevalent at much higher altitudes, the phenomenon has been known to occur even on smaller peaks like those of the Tatra Mountains. The symptoms for the deaths which emerge from Valeria's account are similar to those found in severe cases of this condition. However, the timescales are far too short. The time between onset and death is usually hours, not minutes, and at lower altitudes, this process is even slower. As a result, death from AMS at such a low altitude is extremely rare, with less than 5% of cases proving fatal. Essentially, what we have is an extremely rare condition, taking into account the altitude, causing even rarer fatalities in 3 individuals, all at the exact same time. This would be unheard of in mountaineering circles, as pulmonary edemas are very specific to each individual. It is not something that generally affects everyone in a group at the same time. Not only that, but Wasserberger in particular was a seasoned climber. As a veteran of the Swiss Alps, the Tatra Mountains would have been a walk in the park for him, so why he was affected in this way is a complete mystery. If the deaths were caused by something environmental as opposed to biological, such as an aerosol or maybe even a vacuum created by the fierce winds, then why would it only affect the male members of the group and leave Valeria unharmed? Could there be some unknown biological process in the male body which activates under certain conditions? Perhaps the administering of alcohol only served to exacerbate this phenomenon. Of course, this is completely speculative, but some of the more fringe theories point to the similarities in other deaths involving males, low temperatures, and trace amounts of alcohol, such as those seen in the canals of Manchester, England, and various parts of the US. Although intriguing, this is a tenuous connection at best, but one that perhaps warrants more investigation. With so little evidence to go on, both because of the circumstances of the event and the passage of time, sadly, theory is all that can be applied. Whatever the cause, be it naturally occurring or something more artificial, it is difficult to see beyond the tragic deaths of those involved. It is possible that as our understanding of mountaineering and the various hazards associated with it improves, in the future, a new explanation may be offered for the deaths which occurred on that fateful summer's day. For now, all we are left with is an enduring mystery, which makes little to no sense. May the souls of these unfortunate hikers rest in peace, with the hope that their passing may one day help in understanding other mysterious deaths which occur in the mountains.
I didn't even like plan it to make it all like how they like kind of like we're about like a similar subject to the mountains, but with me, cute. Not cute, but I mean it was cute that I did that and I didn't even try. Okay, hold on, Elizabeth. What were you talking about? But remember that family in LA? Which one? Are you talking about the young couple? Hold on. You just said some lady B that's actually only male aliens. They need to increase the herd. It's so interesting you said that because I saw a special once, and it was about like tons of research that people have done on people who have been abducted, and there's like common themes with people who are abducted, like families skip generations, but also they said that the males are increasingly more abducted than the females, like by a high percentage, which I thought was fascinating. I was like, really? So you could be onto something there. I don't doubt it. Oh yeah, if you guys have not seen my poll, I did put a poll up on my community tab on my channel today, and it's about it's an alien question. Don't worry, it doesn't have. It's over. I hope it's not scaring you. Yes, totally, I agree there. Yes, okay. So I had heard about. I remember that. Did they ever find out anything conclusive? Do you know? That was so sad. That whole story was so sad. Female aliens, I could go to. I could go with that. Yeah, no, it says that males. Well, at least for not about the aliens, but they said that males are more commonly abducted than females, and males and male bloodlines too, because like they said, it seems to happen in certain like families or groups, or some, and it'll even skip generations, but it's usually males or male lineage. Scary. Why are you scared? I didn't even say suitcase. Don't be scared. Oh, take my poll though, guys. It was a good question. Take it night, Mr. Malloy. I'm still not sure how I feel about the whole alien abduction thing, but definitely feel they might be out there. So that was my question on my poll, was about if, let's say, if there is aliens out there. And my question was about what do you think their intentions would be. So take the poll. I want to hear everyone's answers. But all right, guys. So I'm gonna end it here, so I can finish doing what I was doing. I have to finish cleaning up my room like a good girl. Yes, yes. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I appreciate you. I will be back tomorrow night. And make sure you do hit the like on your way out if you did it on the way in. I'd appreciate it. All right, y'all. I will see everyone later.